discussions. Local election special.
So, Kira, thank you for coming on the show. Just to get, can you give a little bit of discussion as to who you are, and just so people, just those listening, know, why you're here today.
Thank you very much. I'm Cllr Kieran Thorpe. I've been a councillor since 2009. I represent South West Hatfield Ward, formerly South Hatfield Ward, on Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council, and because of that, I represent pretty much all the students in Hatfield.
Very nice, and thank you for coming on, and you're here to seek re-election, and I just wanted to ask you some questions.
Absolutely fine.
Okay then, my first question is, what will the Labour Party do for local councils that will make them different from what the other parties would do?
Well, I think that's a good, straightforward question, and I'd like to answer it, and all your questions, hopefully, with straightforward answers. We could be here all day discussing how we are different, but if I had to name one thing, then it would be our pledge to reverse the recent pay rises the Conservative councillors awarded themselves on the council, 68% pay rises in some cases. And when Labour take control, of course it would be ourselves in those senior positions, and the first thing we will do is give ourselves a pay cut and take those allowances back to where they were before. Now, we're not talking big money, but we are talking big principles here. I don't think the other parties have pledged this. Of course the Conservatives wouldn't, but I don't think I've ever heard of a group of politicians pledging to give themselves a pay cut on day one. But that's what we're going to do.
How much would this pay cut be, and what would you use the money for?
Well, as I said, we're only talking a few £1,000s here and there. It's different for different positions, and therefore using that money, pledging to use that money on one particular thing wouldn't make much sense. But we're going to use that money. It's more of a gesture, to be honest, to bolster public services that are crumbling.
Okay, and also on that note, I guess, what will your party do about local infrastructure, like, say, road potholes, for example?
Well, absolutely. Potholes are, of course, a serious issue in Welwyn Hatfield, as they are all over the country. And they're a danger not just to motorists, but cyclists and pedestrians too. Unfortunately, 99% of all the potholes are on the main highways, and this comes under the remit of the County Council, which isn't being contested in this election, and even more unfortunately, has always been under Conservative control. We need more money. The government needs to wake up to the severe problems facing the country due to chronic underinvestment in our infrastructure. And I want to be clear that although we don't have the responsibility for potholes, we will work closely with those who do and shine a spotlight on them when they fail to act.
And on that note, I guess also, what will your party do about potential pressures on local services, like, say, the cuts that you have just cited?
Absolutely, that's crucial, and there's nothing potential about the damage being done by our local services from Conservative austerity. It's real, it's hurting, it's not working, and people are paying more for them in council tax. We will deliver services that do the job they're supposed to, and crucially, we will be upfront about what is happening. In all my time on the council, all I've seen on committee meetings are surveys and statistics that say how great everything is and how happy everyone is with it. It's just not true, and we'll change that for a start. We'll be honest. Almost all the contracts are privatised out, and every time they come up for renewal, bringing them back under our council control isn't even looked at. And through better monitoring and a willingness to embrace the full range of opportunities to deliver public services, I think we can radically improve the services people receive in Welwyn Hatfield.
Okay, and on that grounds, what I guess proof do you have about people not being satisfied with services? What, like, statistical things? Like, is it just like local people telling you that they're not happy, for example?
Well, absolutely. So, take for instance the bin contract, the refuse and street scene cleaning contract. So that's the main one. That's rubbish left around on the streets. Your bin's not getting picked up. When we actually sit on council committee meetings, we hear that people are overwhelmingly satisfied with that, and I know that's just not true. And I've asked them, how do you know? How do you know? And they said, well, we do telephone surveys. I said, well, how many people do you ask? And they said, we can't tell you that. I said, well, where do those people live? They said, we can't tell you that. I said, well, who does those surveys? They said, Cllr do them. Cllr are the company that deliver the service, and they're also the ones doing the surveys to say how great their service is. There's something very wrong there.
Lies down, lies the statistics and all. Anyway, and beyond that, what other things will your party do that will help local communities, do you think?
Well, absolutely. So that's what we're all about, local communities. We're people from the local community. For too long, Welwyn Hatfield has seemed to work against what people want in a detached, aloof manner. They don't bother to explain what's going on and why it's happening. I believe this is because almost always they're shying away from having to admit that it's government cuts behind what's going wrong. When you look at the services delivered by Well in Hatfield and where the money comes from to deliver it, we've lost over half of our funding since 2010. Half. You want to know why there are potholes, overgrown bushes, rubbish everywhere? Half our money has gone. So we'll be honest and we'll stop ignoring people's concerns. We'll work with organisations across Well in Hatfield, not just for photo ops, but to deliver real change. We've got people begging in our town centres. There are people sleeping in doorways. We've got a university here in Hatfield. We're the centre of Hertfordshire, literally. We can be so much better and we will do so much better.
Could you move your mic a little bit closer to the mouth just because it seems the effect is sort of being picky.
And on I guess more of like a challenging note, according to various polls, one of which I saw in the Guardian just came out after the election, the last year's election. How do you feel that, according to those polls, and not necessarily sure what range they cover, is not popular among some working class voters anymore? And do you think that this is a actual problem that you notice? And if so, what are your party going to do to combat the problem?
Well, I'm really glad you asked me that question. And I think you have to remember, first of all, that opinion polls are there to influence opinion rather than accurately measure them in most cases. Now, I'm working class. I have to go to work to live. Most of my Labour councillors are the same or they're retired. The leader of Hatfield Town Council is a window cleaner, and I remember having to give the apologies for my Labour group whip on the council because he was currently at work under a Uno bus repairing it. We are a working class party. The first time I came to this university when I was younger was when I was working cleaning the toilets here. But I think it's patronising to try and appeal to the working class specifically. I remember Grant Shapps got this spectacularly wrong, saying the Tories were going to cut tax on bingo and beer and the things that people like. What I hope we're doing is showing that everyone that they're better off under Labour.
And also, I guess, on the issue of the Labour Party as a whole, do you feel that the Labour Party may be harmed in these elections by recent controversies like the whole anti-Semitism issue that has cropped up?
Well, in terms of the effect of that, I've no idea, to be honest. We'll have to wait and see till May the 3rd or the morning of May the 4th. But I'm glad that it's not an issue that's arisen in our local party, to my knowledge, in Well in Hatfield. I'd like to think that people choose who they vote for locally based on what they would do rather than anything else, but I know that's not always the case. And I appreciate there are issues to resolve around this, and sadly there's also people who need to look at their behaviour and to be called out and thrown out because of it. I'd like to see all parties scrutinised to the same degree rather than it being used to score political points, which I think sometimes it is by some people. Sadly, I think that politics is a mirror to society, and where there are problems there, and there are, so too will there be in politics. What concerns me is how quickly people on all sides embrace that, including my side, as a weapon to attack the whole party, rather than do anything meaningful to resolve why these abhorrent views still persist in the 21st century.
And on a little bit more of a lighter note, what made you decide to run as a candidate, and specifically for the Labour Party in the first place back in 2009?
Thank you. Well, I've always been interested in politics. As a child, I was taken to Nottingham for a festival to thank those who had supported striking miners. I'd given up some, not all, but some of my Christmas presents so that children of miners wouldn't go without in those years, although I didn't know at the time. I remember protests when the Tories tried to repeatedly close my school in Hatfield, and the anger there was when they closed other schools in Hatfield. Now we don't have enough schools. I remember the poll tax, bailiffs knocking on my parents' door, the local community coming together to defend itself. That's community to me, and we've had far more of it then than we do now, but we still have it. So I hope I don't have to explain why I'm proud to stand and to lead the Labour Party in Well in Hatfield. But why stand at all? That's your question. If I'm honest, it was anger. In 2008, we just had all-out elections for the Borough Council. Literally the day after that polling day, it came out in the press that Hatfield Town Centre wasn't going to get the regeneration they'd been promising for years and years before. So everyone had gone out and voted, and then the Conservatives won by miles, and then, sorry, we're not doing it. They knew it had been cancelled before that, of course, but they chose not to tell anyone until after they'd voted. That infuriated me. I went to protest meetings. Then soon after, the Conservative County Council tried to build an incinerator to burn Hertfordshire's rubbish and commercial waste in Hatfield, my hometown, right next to a special needs school not far from this university. They closed the library, they moved the special needs school, and spent millions doing that in the process. I stood as a candidate for Labour to stop these things happening, and as you say, I was elected in 2009, narrowly beating the Tory mayor's daughter. I spent the next few years being told by all and sundry that we had no chance of stopping that incinerator. I helped organise a residents group which really took off, and we had a march from the hilltop down to the town centre. Over 1,000 people were there with placards that I'd made. Grant Shapps turned up and people booed him because it was his party doing this. I've never been so proud of Hatfield, but the anger remained. And it's not healthy to be motivated by anger, but I was. But from that point, when we defeated the Tories over the incinerator, and when I look at what Labour is doing on Hatfield Town Council, fireworks, music festivals every year, my anger turned to hope. All these people saying you can't do this, you won't change that. Sometimes they're right, but every time they're wrong, it is worth all the effort. Every time we can make Welwyn Hatfield a better place, a fairer place, it is worth it. That's why I'm standing for election.
And would you say that's your proudest achievement as a council so far to stop this incinerator being developed, or was there another? I guess what other highlights would you say were in your career so far?
Well, we've been in opposition the whole time since I've been elected, so in terms of meaningful change, we're rather limited. That was definitely one of my proudest moments. But it wasn't just me. Others have tried to take credit for it and said, oh, it was just me. But actually seeing the community coming together and being a part of leading that made me proud. Other than that, there's been countless things that I've helped people on individual issues. I remember an ex-soldier, he'd left the army after serving in Iraq, and he was homeless. And he contacted me, and he hadn't had any help from his MP, in fact a couple of MPs. And I contacted the council and I made some representations on his behalf. And I remember on Christmas Eve one year, it was many years ago, Christmas Eve, he texted me to say thank you very much. He'd just been given keys to a council flat, and he and his daughter were moving in there. And that really, really made me feel proud. And that happened, there's all sorts of stories like that, but that one always sticks in my memory.
Mm-hmm. And who would you, I guess, look up to politically? Who would you say is your biggest influences, either just in the political, as just general politicians, or otherwise?
Well, other than my mum, who took me to all those events, like the striking miners events, benefits dues, I like Tony Benn a lot. I liked Tony Benn a lot. But I don't try and base myself on anyone. I met the current Shadow Chancellor in Brighton about a decade ago, John McDonnell, when he was a backbencher, he was talking about the Shrewsbury pickets at a fringe event. And I thought he spoke really well in a way that connected with ordinary people. I'd just joined the Labour Party, I had no idea who he was then. And what I think is crucial, very crucial, when you're involved in politics and you've been elected, you're inside the machine, is to remember who you were at the beginning, why you got involved, what you wanted to achieve, and what the wrongs were that you wanted to right. And I think too many people along the way forget all about that, and they fail to make any difference.
And also, I guess on that front, if you don't mind me asking, who would you say our best and worst Prime Minister had been?
I think Margaret Thatcher was definitely the worst. Not specifically due to one particular policy, although there are many. But going back to what I said before, it's her willful destruction of our strong communities, which she felt she needed to do to remain in power, break the unions, etc. And some people lauded that. But I think when I go around now in Welwyn Hatfield and I'm knocking on people's doors and I see these stickers, don't knock on my door, we don't want anything, no religion, no politics, no leaflets, we're fine as we are. I think that is a result of those policies that she implemented. In terms of the best... Yeah, most prime ministers, once they've gone, they're not looked at favourably, and I think I'll take a cop out and say Clement Attlee founded the NHS, founded the welfare state as it is or as it was. Radical change.
And what would you personally bring to the table? We'll come back to the council elections. What would you bring to the table if you were to be elected? What would you bring what would you bring?
Well, hopefully what I've brought to the table for the last decades, honesty, so that residents know what's going on and why. If something's going on that isn't very good, but there's a reason behind it, you need to be honest and tell them. Hard work, so that when people need my help with individual issues, they get it. I get phone calls morning, noon and night, all times of the day, and I'm always there to help. And the determination to bring change, even if we remain in opposition, even if we don't win these elections, but definitely if we're in control of the council, we will bring about change. Things will be different. And I don't do any of that to feel important, or I certainly don't do it for the money. I reject huge pay rises for councillors, and I've never claimed a single expense the whole time I've been elected. I'm always available to help people, and I'm always happy to listen to people's views, even when they're not necessarily probably what I want to hear.
Fair enough. And you said you've been at the council since 2009. What have you done to keep yourself to account? And if Labour were to win this council election in this area, what would they do to keep themselves to account?
Well, we're always speaking to people. I think that's the best way to be held to account, isn't to have surveys done or look at graphs and statistics. It's to get out there and meet people. We hold advice surgeries on the third Saturday of every month at the Jim McDonald Centre. No one comes, of course. I mean, sometimes they do, but very, very rarely. We're always about talking to people on social media, very active on that, knocking on doors. I think if we're doing a bad job, people will tell us, and we speak to people all the time.
And what would you say probably has been the most negative aspect of being a councillor as of yet? Is it like just maybe being in the opposition? Maybe like you talked about the highlights. What has been like the most, I guess, the most negative thing about being a councillor as of yet?
Well, certainly as opposition, it's watching things being done to Welwyn Hatfield that even though you vote against it, you lose every time and it goes through. The most depressing thing for me, being a politician, regardless of being a councillor, is knocking on doors and being told you're all the same by people who have no idea who you are. I always say to them, what am I the same as? That's really quite depressing. People say I don't vote. I knocked on a lady's door yesterday. She must have been in her 60s, and she said, "Oh, I don't vote. I never vote." I said, "You've never voted in your whole life?" She said, "No." I said, "Why?" She said, "You're all the same." I said, "Well, what would you want to be different?" She said, "Oh, I don't know," and shut the door. That's quite depressing sometimes, but we carry on because most people aren't like that.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about some of the events that the council put on every year. Is that and besides those, what other ways would you like to present yourself to the community as a whole? Would you just continue to such events, or would there be other ways you would like to present yourself to the community, like as in be more recognisable face there, just to keep yourself well known throughout the community? Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's important that you make it clear to the community that we're from the community. We're not robots that have been deployed from Westminster in here. We live in Welwyn Hatfield. We love Welwyn Hatfield. We want to see it better. The community events are a fantastic way of bringing people together. You know, that's the theme. I really want people to come together. And so when we have a free music event, which is delivered by Labour-run Hatfield Town Council at Birchwood every year, I'd like to see more students there for this year for a start. I think it's in June the 16th. That brings people together. We want to see more of that. We have a fireworks display, which I think is at the Park and Ride here. That brings people together. So we'll do more of that. We used to have those things in Welwyn Hatfield. We used to have so much more. We used to get your bins picked up every week rather than fortnightly. And we want to get back to that. And it seems strange sometimes that I always assumed that the Conservatives would do things like that. You know, I think it's just a stereotype. They conserve things, keep things, all the things we loved from the past. But they don't. They wreck them and they get rid of them. And then they say you can't bring them back. Well, I say you can.
Forgive me for sounding moronic, but why do you think they do that? As in, like, get rid of these, things and stuff like that. So why do you think they do it? Sorry if this is a moronic question. Just
no, it's fine. I think it goes to the heart of politics because they don't use them. They don't see the value in them. They've never believed in the value of community. They say they do, but they don't when it comes to it. And it's all about saving money. And they don't see the true value. They know the price of everything, but the value of nothing. And they get rid of these things, and then they make it difficult to bring them back. And when I say they're not of the community, of course they are. But they don't come to these things. They're squirreled away in their own little gated communities. They don't like to be mixing with the hoi polloi. They just don't get it.
And you talked about meeting John McDonnell. What other members of your own party, who's the highest up guys you've met in your party, over your, I guess, 9 years as being councillor?
Well, I met Jeremy Corbyn. He was outside an event. This was a few years ago. He was a backbencher then. He was outside talking on the phone. We had a good chat about politics. Little did I know he was going to be the leader of the party and the next Prime Minister, I hope. I met Gordon Brown while he was still Prime Minister at a Labour Party conference. Sadly, he wasn't Prime Minister for much longer after that. But I've met lots and lots of them.
Mm-hmm. Did you initially support Jeremy Corbyn during the leadership contest? Because I remember how heated that sort of contest was.
Yeah, absolutely. I voted for Ed Miliband. That was the first leadership contest that I took part in, and he won. And then I voted for Jeremy Corbyn. I think we needed something very, very different, and he certainly presented that, stood out amongst the first time, and he won. And then, of course, there was a follow-up leadership contest, and I voted for Jeremy Corbyn again.
Fair enough. And what do you think made Corbyn different, I guess, from his competitors who were with him as well, like Yvette Cooper and Liz Kendall and Andy Burnham?
I think it's the honesty and the integrity. People believe him. He has a far more I'm not saying they're dishonest. I'm saying he has a track record of the things he's voted on, the things he's done in the past, which people like to bring up sometimes to bash him, but he's always been consistent. I think that's an important thing in politics. If you really have these principles and you believe something, then you say them and you display them. And you know that not always they're popular. A friend of mine gave me this really good analogy. If you really truly believe something, political opinion is like the tides of the sea. Sometimes they go out, sometimes they come in. But if you actually believe something, you get on your rock and you sit there and you're consistent. And when the sea goes out and the sea comes in, you've always been there, constantly saying the same thing. And I think that really helps people to believe it, rather than chasing after public opinion.
Mm-hmm. And I understand you've been, you've given positive press to the call. What do you think he's doing so well among certain demographics, like, say, young students, for example, he seems to do particularly well? Why do you think that's the case? Well,
some people would say, I think, insultingly, these people don't know what they've not experienced life, they don't know the real world. And I think that's absolutely outrageous. I think he offers hope and difference, a change. And I know these are all meaningless buzzwords, but he really actually is implementing and coming out with policies like free bus travel for under 25s. People say, it's a freebie, how can you afford that? Look at our road network, it's jam-packed, we need to do something. And when you look at the things he's putting forward, it's not actually all that radical. They're doing it in Scandinavian countries, it's done all over the world, most of these policies. And I think people are sick of just the same old career politicians, cloned politicians coming out saying the same old things. And I think Jeremy Corbyn represents something completely different, and I think it's really refreshing to see it being welcomed by so many.
Okay. And on the topic, I guess, of being opposition and stuff like that, if you were to be elected to opposition again, what would you try and do to, I guess, expand your influence, I suppose? Sorry if that's a bit of a vague question, just trying to think.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I mean, I think it depends on the results on Thursday, and I'd urge everyone to go out and vote Labour on Thursday. We need as many councillors as we can to take control of Welwyn Hatfield Council. We've been in opposition for a very long time, 16 years now, and I think we need change. And when you've got more opposition councillors, it enables you to be more of an opposition, because everything comes down to a show of hands. So when you've got more of you, it makes it harder for them to push through stupid policies like giving themselves 68% pay rises, for example, or charging people to have their brown bins emptied. We can stop those things if we're in power. I think what we would do is just, if we are, and I hope we're not, back in opposition, we'll just intensify that. And our role, I think, is to actually tell people what's going on, because you don't get that from the council. The local press can only do so much, and it falls to us to tell people what's going on and why it's happening.
Mm-hmm. Have you had any? I'm not sure. Miss Lee, forgive me for not researching this. Who Hatfield's MP or this area's MP? Have you had much in the way of clashes with them, or just while you've been a councillor?
Oh yeah, constantly. I know Grant very well. Grant Shapps is our
Okay.
MP. He's Conservative, sadly. I know him very well. He knows me very well. I try not to get personal, but we do tend to disagree on most things. He supports blowing up Syria as a way of showing how you shouldn't be blowing up bits of Syria. He supports many policies that I fundamentally disagree with. And but crucially, my irritation with Grant comes from he's not honest with people. He doesn't tell people why things are happening. He's the first person to go and meet a residents group and say to them, there's this big pothole here, we'll get this fixed. But he doesn't tell them why it's happening. That goes back to my previous point. You need to be honest with people. He wouldn't tell them that we've cut half the council's funding, and worse for the county council. He wouldn't tell them that many of the things that he supposedly champions and wants to write are as a direct result of the votes that he himself has taken, and that really irks me.
Mm-hmm. And I guess also on that front, just to talk about elected guys, just because I talked about the last person I had on here, what do you think about the London Mayor Sadiq Khan at the moment, and do you think there'll be any sort of issues, I guess, with actually this is not a London seat, so never mind, actually thinking about it. What do you think of his job as a mayor? Just because I discussed it with the last candidate, I think I might as well give some continuity, if you don't mind me asking.
What do I think about the job he's doing?
Yes, as in how do you think he's doing, if you don't mind me asking?
I think he's doing really rather well. I mean, being London Mayor is a difficult job. Obviously you're representing so many people. I think the last London Mayor was a bit of and still is a bit of a clown. I think you're beholden really to a lot of awful government policies that make it difficult. You look at policing levels, and that's something that does have effect here as well. They're the first to say, crime's going up in London, it's all Sadiq's fault. Well, it's not. When you look at what's been done to the police service and has been done to the police service over the last 15 years or so, it's we're seeing less police officers, and I think there's only so much you can do as London Mayor to sort of shield London citizens from that. But I think he's doing a good job. I think he's a very capable politician, Sadiq Khan. And I think people are, the election he won, the Conservative campaign was just horrendously dog whistle racism. And I think he's overcome a lot of that to show people that Labour can make a difference.
Mm-hmm. And I guess also on that front, just to see if I can, because I also asked the last guy this, will there be anyone in any of the other sort of parties that, like, from the past, like you say, you admire, even if you don't necessarily like them, I suppose?
Not greatly, to be honest. We're not a big fan of Conservatives in my house. I admire any politicians of any colour that are prepared to stand out and, as I said, going back, tell people why things are happening. Often buck the party line. People are honest enough to do that. There's plenty of those in the Labour Party too. And actually put their residents first. I mean, there's too many yes men and women in politics. Prime Minister's questions, you see it every single week. It's depressing. Mm-hmm. I admire anyone that's prepared to stand up and tell it how it really is.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think of Jeremy Corbyn's a stance about the Skripal case in Syria, where he stresses a non-interventionist policy? Not that I just, I think I'm a little bit more inclined with him actually on that front. What do you think?
Well, I think that's a very, very strange issue, to be honest, because you see support from that from the far right. Sadly, it seems libertarian views, don't get involved. I think this country will be forever wounded by our interventions in the past in the Middle East, and therefore there's an instinctive reaction to not get involved in things. I think that's not always necessarily the right thing. I think, when there's people that need help in the world, although we're not the world police, there is a case to be made for getting involved. I think the Syrian issue is incredibly complicated. You've got Russian armed forces based in Syria. You've got American and UK-backed groups. No one seems to know who's fighting for who. There's atrocities happening all over the place by all of these different groups. That's undeniable. And the thing that really breaks my heart is it's the poor Syrian people in the middle that are suffering, and our government's response to that was to fire missiles at them. I just think it really wounds me. I don't know what the answer is. I do know that dropping bombs on it isn't the answer.
And you said foreign intervention sometimes justify. What examples would you give, I guess, of justifiable foreign intervention, just out of curiosity?
Well, to be honest, there's not a great track record of that. But when you look at Yugoslavia, Kosovo, when there's an identifiable need and a real tangible way of saving people's lives, not changing their government, but saving people's lives, I think it's right that we've got involved in that in the past. I'd like to see us do more of that. Sadly, it tends to only happen when there are financial interests, oil or gas or other natural resources or governments we don't like. That's when we get involved. Mm-hmm. I'd like to see us doing more to actually help people.
Do you think it would be better if we, place sanctions as opposed to just, launching missiles in these countries? Or do you think that or just another sort of, not drastic intervention sort of thing?
Well, of course, I'm opposed to dropping bombs on people, so the question is, what would you do? And I think sanctions have their role. They don't always seem to work, and again, they often seem to harm the people at the bottom, the poorest. When you look at where the most heavy sanctions are levied, it doesn't seem to actually, certainly I don't think sanctions really make much difference to Vladimir Putin, for instance, although they do have an impact on the people around them. I think sanctions have their place, but I think we need to look at the overall, the world police aspect, the United Nations. What does it do? It's a good thing, but do we need to revisit that and then look at their scope and look at actually how we stop horrible things happening to people around the globe? There's so many people suffering. They don't get mentioned in the news. It's not even an issue, and it's just, it's always the way. I just find it rather depressing.
Do you think then, in that regard, foreign aid will be, I guess, sort of the best option out of that sort of, helping these people, I guess?
Well, I think foreign aid is something that's given to a wide range of reasons. I find foreign aid is often for economic self-interest, to be honest. We'll give you this foreign aid, but we'll get this back. I think the UK is embroiled in a lot of it because of our colonial past and our interests across the globe. You can't just switch that off. I think we should be aiding people in need. I'm not sure we are.
And I guess on that front, what sort have you done any like sort of charity drives at home, for example? What sort of activities have you got involved in at home involving that? I guess like anything around this area, for example, in terms of like charity drives or whatnot.
Well, as a little boy, I remember I got my Blue Peter badge. There was the Romanian orphans. We organised a bring and buy sale. In terms of recently, I mean, every year, all politicians seem to spend lots of money having Christmas cards given to people. It's a really weird thing. We all give each other Christmas cards, even though, I mean, we do like each other, but we probably spend the rest of the year having a go at each other, and then you get Christmas cards from them all. I don't do that. I gave money last year to I can't remember, it was a charity in Syria. Before, to be honest, it all sort of started to ramp up. I think it was the year before. That's really a gesture. I think we need to do more.
And what things do you do, I guess, because I also this is the last candidate, like a small businesses sort of thing and businesses around the area. What do you do? What ways do you get involved with small businesses around this area?
Well, as an opposition party, we can't really mandate the council to do that. I work as a small business advisor in Hatfield for a scheme that covers the whole of Hertfordshire. I am very committed, and small business is the backbone of our economy, and it's also, due to the Conservatives, crucial to the local council, because I mentioned they're taking away half of our funding. Soon they're going to take away the other half, and what we'll be left with is what we can raise in business rates. Now, hopefully that won't be too bad in Welland Hatfield. We've got lots of small businesses here and lots of large businesses too. We need to support them. We need to keep them here, because if we don't, we won't have any money. So I think it's absolutely vital. I know the council has an economic development unit. We called for that for years. When the actual crash happened in 2008, that was something that the Conservatives did. This business-friendly Conservative Party axed our local economic development unit, made them all redundant. So we didn't have anything. And I asked them, why was that? And they said, well, you've got Business Link East, which was the regional business support service, who I actually happened to work for, based in Hatfield. And then David Cameron, in 2010, got rid of that. So I think it's important we rebuild those bridges and support businesses to thrive in Welland Hatfield.
Fair enough. And I guess what other sort of damage, sorry if this sounds similar to what I've gone over previously, the cuts I guess have done to the Hatfield area, what other sort of, I guess, damage have they done in your view?
They damage our services. We see that. You'd have to be blind not to see that. Buses, the potholes in the road, just rubbish everywhere. Your bins get picked up now every 2 weeks rather than every week. If you're lucky, they get picked up. We see it on a personal level, and you don't always see that in the press because people aren't particularly keen, obviously, to air their own sort of personal issues across the media. People struggling. You've got universal credit. People really struggling to survive. I think it's absolutely outrageous. I think you look at the state of the town centre. It's getting better in many ways, but in some ways, it's been left for decades now to just rot away. And I think it's really crucial that we start to look at these things and bring and say, no, we can't take any more. We've seen homeless people now, people begging in the town centre. And I know that people have issues around that, they're not really homeless. There are homeless people in Hatfield. You see people living in the woods, people living in hedges. You see sleeping bags everywhere. We never used to have that. We never even had that in the 80s. And I think it can get worse, but we can't take any more. It's got to stop.
And yeah, so far you've been campaigning and stuff like that. What's been, I guess, the response so far? It's been mostly positive one, or just what you've been canvassing and stuff like that, for example, just general campaigning? Well,
one of the things I'd really like people to do is when someone knocks on your door, even if you don't agree with them, is actually come to the door, because it's very difficult to gauge when people just won't answer the door. But we in Hatfield, Labour do quite well. We've done really rather well in the last few years. As I said, it's a Labour-controlled town council, parish council in Hatfield. But across Welland Hatfield, we are actually seeing people starting to wake up to what's happening. We've been banging the drum since 2010. Lots of people there were of the opinion, we've got to live in our means. These cuts are a good thing. I think that's changed. I think public opinion has changed, and they're saying enough is enough. And we're starting to hear that on the doorstep, and I hope we start to see that in the ballot box on Thursday. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just because I've seen, and how do you feel, I guess, certain polls, like, say, Labour are going to do very well in these elections? Why do you think, sorry to sound really silly, but why do you think that is? Because I think it was in the Times that said that Labour will probably do very well, they'll pick up about at least 35, if not more, seats from council seats and stuff like that, or more, I think. Why do you think that's the case?
people always vote against whoever's in the government. I think that's an undeniable trend. But this time more than ever, I think people have had enough of the same old rubbish. We've had it for 16 years in Welling Hatfield. Obviously, across the country, you've had the Tories in power. The cuts are happening everywhere. The damage is being done everywhere. But going back to the opinion polls, don't just sit back and go, "Oh, Labour's got this in the bag." It really does depend on everyone going out to vote and voting for Labour, because it's the only way you're going to see that change. Opinion polls, as we've seen in the last few years, they're often very, very wrong indeed.
And just thinking about. What would you say? What do you think is going to be the sort of clincher issue that's going to win you these these elections? What do you think is going to be the clincher issue? What do you think will give you, I guess, the biggest boost in terms of gaining victory?
Well, certainly one of the massive spikes of anger, because it affects everyone, almost everyone, in Welling Hatfield, is that council tax has gone up by 5%. You look at the portions of council tax that have been put up. The Police and Crime Commissioner has put up their portion of council tax. You've actually seen less police officers. Crime is rising. Hertfordshire County Council has put up their council tax. You've seen potholes all over the place. Things aren't getting fixed. Social care is all being slashed. Welling Hatfield Council has put up their council tax. You've seen services crumbling there. And on top of that, they gave themselves a massive pay rise. You've seen Hatfield Town Council, Labour Hatfield Town Council, not put up council tax. And yet you've seen the services massively flourish that they provide, mostly for free. So, to use the Conservatives' own tactic, if it's about money you pay and tax, they're failing you, we're not. And I think people are waking up to the fact that they're paying more for less and less. And what we're saying is that doesn't have to be the case. So I hope that's the biggest issue. That's what people are telling us is the biggest issue. It shouldn't be the only issue, but of course people look to their own finances and what they're paying.
And you talk about this, the fact that the council there's less council tax for that specific council mentioned, but the services got better. Why do you think that was, and if so, what tactics do you hope to replicate that? Do you hope to replicate from them if you do win these elections?
Yeah, absolutely. Hatfield Town Council is a runaway success story, in my opinion. Of course, I'd say that I'm biased, but I think what you saw there is a group of local people who weren't necessarily historically, politicians. Take up the mantle of Hatfield Town Council. I think it was I won't call it a giant, but it was certainly asleep for a long time. It was under the Conservatives' control, and they immediately found efficiency savings. They found a gas heater, a water heater running off gas that had been on constantly for 13 years in a room that no one used. They turned that off. They found lights that were on in cupboards that had been on constantly for 13 years. They found all sorts of waste in contracts that had simply been given back to the same people where you could get better value for service elsewhere. They saved all that money. And they also then started to put on events that people weren't necessarily screaming for, but use and really enjoy. We had a Battle of Britain event, free. They have the fireworks, which the previous council got rid of, and the borough council, axed. We used to have those at Stanborough Lakes. They put that on. That wasn't free, but it was heavily subsidised. They put on a free music event at Birchwood Playing Fields every year. People come to these things, and they're not paying any more for them. The Conservatives called that reckless spending. We're actually doing more with less.
And I guess that's what you talk about, this sort of thing. I'm sorry if I've gone over this before again, just trying to think of questions. Would you say, I guess, you're a Corbynista in that sense then, or just a general supporter?
Yeah, I don't like those terms. Mainly because Theresa May doesn't have one, which probably says all about who she is and what she's done. Maybots. I thought she was the Maybot. I don't know. But I wouldn't call myself a Corbynista. I think there is I don't like to use the word the cult of a personality, but certainly he is fervently backed by many people who would never criticise Jeremy for anything. I think Jeremy would accept criticism on a number of things. But I back him. I absolutely think that we need to see massive change, and I see him offering that. And of course, I've got much admiration for the man, the amount of flack that he's taken and continues to take, and doesn't respond, doesn't come out, doesn't do the name calling, the spiteful retorts or anything like that. I think you have to admire that.
And you talk about like certain people who won't criticise it. Do you think that's I guess a problem with like certain critics like guest momentum or being allegedly having all this sway and stuff in the Labour Party, or do you think that's just a meaningless issue, like a little thing that's been blown out of proportion?
Yeah, it's massively blown out of proportion. We don't have a momentum, an established momentum based in Welwyn Hatfield. Jeremy Corbyn's overwhelmingly backed by Welwyn Hatfield Labour Party. I think momentum is a fantastic thing for mobilising young people, mobilising voters. I think we have to remember that in these elections on Thursday, we're probably looking at no more than 35% of people coming out to vote. That's of registered voters. Younger people, that drops off. Students, that drops off to single figures. I think that's really depressing. So anything that can engage with people better has to be applauded. There's people within the party that are against momentum. There are people in the party that are against other factions such as Progress that have been around for a lot longer and seeing their sort of power diminishing. These sorts of internal battles aren't necessarily of interest to the public, but I think I really would downplay their significance. We're all in the Labour Party at the end of the day. We all want the Labour Party to win.
Okay. And I guess on that front, would you say this Labour Party in particular, this Welwyn Hatfield was one of the biggest supporters of, because you said Hatfield is a huge backer call. Do you think it's one of the strongest regional areas for like Corbyn support, or do you think there's just general consistency among just the Labour bases around the country?
Yeah, I wouldn't know necessarily about other parties enough to talk about those. I see it everywhere. If you see some elements within the Labour Party not as enthusiastic about Jeremy Corbyn, you see some very unhappy with that. Certain MPs, that's their right to do that. I think when you get to the level of talking about constituency Labour parties, I don't know of any that are anything less than fully enthusiastic with Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. When you look at last summer, what happened, I've been involved in lots of elections. Some of them have been better than others. Last year's was fantastic. The people coming out that weren't even members of the Labour Party, people putting up posters, people actually coming out on their front door saying, we'll vote for you, we're really excited about this. I'd love to see that happening now. It does in some quarters. Of course, it was a very sunny June snap election. I wish all elections were in June. Looking out the window now. But I think people really are embracing change, but they need to see the change. It's no good embracing change in opposition. We need to see it happening.
Mm-hmm. And just because I asked the last person this, you don't have to ask this if you don't want to. It's a little bit more of like a party question. Is there anyone in your own party that you don't particularly like? Just because the Conservative guy said he didn't like Jacob Rees-Mogg very much. You don't have to answer just because I asked. I just continuity and all.
Well, I don't dislike Jacob Rees-Mogg. I don't like most of the things that he says. My mum absolutely loves Jacob Rees-Mogg. He's like a strange, otherworldly character. The complete other end of the scale to myself. But one that you need to have that does exist. That upper higher class. I don't say higher, but certainly upper class person. No, there's no one. I don't think it achieves anything to sort of fixate on people and say, I really dislike them. People have different views. I see all politicians come out with things, and I think, I agree with that sometimes. Usually I disagree with most of the things the Conservatives say, but sometimes there are things I think, I agree with that, fair enough.
Broken clock's being right twice a day, I guess. And
exactly.
You were talking about local council elections having a lower turnout. Why do you think that is? Do you think that will change with this upcoming election?
I hope so. I wouldn't probably stick money on it. Which is the pessimist in me, which I think most politicians are pessimistic about such things. I don't know. I honestly don't know, because when you look at national politics, it's big. It changes the country. It can really have massive effects. Local councils can too. When you go out your front door, what's the first thing you walk past? Your bin, or your 3 wheelie bins now that maybe rot in, haven't been collected in up to a month sometimes. You can change that with local voting. Your local representatives live among you. You will never have such good access. You can go and see your MP once a month. You can phone up your local councillor. You can pop round their house if you've asked them and made an appointment, of course. these people live in the community. It's about where you live. There is no closer effect as to your day-to-day standard of living than having a local council. So you should definitely go out and have your say. Even more so when the turnout's so low. That means your vote counts for so much more. We have elections results. Sometimes they're decided on a toss of a coin. I mean, that's ridiculous. Go out and vote. Make that difference happen.
You said like last year's election was, separate election was very much a surprise. Why do you think there was such a swing, I guess, towards the Labour Party in that election?
The general election
last year, general election, yes.
I think the Labour manifesto. I think when that came out and people saw a collection of policies that were different, I think there were two reactions, or there were a few reactions. One was to rubbish it, another was to say, "Oh, you can't afford all that." It was fully costed, unlike the Conservative Party manifesto, I might add. But the main response that I saw was people embracing it, going, "Wow, this is what we've been calling for years, and now you're actually going to do it." And I think you saw football stadiums chanting Jeremy Corbyn's name, Glastonbury. I think there was a whole crest of a real desire for change, and I think we really embraced that then. And I think I'd like to think that that's going to be replicated.
All right. And on that idea, I remember last year a lot of like celebrities, a lot of these singers and stuff back in the Labour Party. Why do you think it tends to attract, I guess, those sort of type, famous people, I guess, just general celebrities? Why do you think they tend to be more like Labour voters than Conservative voters? Do you think it's just general, the fact they've come from the bottom, do you think?
Well, yeah, I think there's backers of all parties that I mean, they get given media coverage. I mean, the political parties love to roll out the celebrity. We've got Ronnie O'Sullivan, Martin Freeman, pretty much anyone that's involved in music. The Conservatives, and I remember in the 80s, Jim Davison, Kenny Everett, I think Stephen Hendry said he was going to leave the country if Labour got in. Paul Daniels, people like that. The list goes on. I don't really hold to how useful that is. I mean, it is, because people who like those celebrities, bizarrely, are swayed by their opinion. Clothes they buy, I'll buy those. Who they're going to vote for, maybe. I mean, we've got Harry Styles. I'll just throw that one in as well.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't know
absolutely.
that.
Harry Styles came out for Jeremy Corbyn and Ed Miliband. I think it's more important that people look at how politics is affecting them rather than what a celebrity has to be saying.
And do you think on that ground, just in general, do you think on the grounds that people just vote because what their favourite celebrity might just endorse, do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, depending on just which way that might go, I guess?
Oh, well, it's a great thing if it's for Labour. But no, I think it's bad. I think if you're going to vote, you don't necessarily need to look into it, because I don't think you have to look at the minutiae of the policies, although, if you're going to, great. I think you need to just look out there about what's happening to your country, what's happening to the place where you live. Is that what you want to see happening? Do you want to see different? If so, what's different? And then look at the political parties and work out which one closely represents what you want to see. Don't listen to all the hubbub and other people saying, "Oh, I'm not going to do this because once upon a time they said this." Just look honestly about what is happening to where you live and your country and what you want to happen, and ask yourself who's going to deliver that.
Mm-hmm. And what was it? I just had a just general question I was going to say about what sorry, I just had a question. It slipped my mind now. I'm just thinking. What other sort of like political campaigns you've been involved in beyond just, I guess, like just a general Labour line, but you can like political campaigns just generally, like in like referendums and stuff like that. What political campaigns you've been involved in beyond just general Labour lines, I guess, just to give people more of a sense of what you stand for? Oh,
okay. So personally, as a child, I'm not sure how much choice I had in this. It was to stop school closures. It was to back striking miners. It was to get rid of the poll tax, which I thought was very unfair. I was only 10 or 11, I think, when that was happening. More recently, anti-war, certainly, anti-Iraq. Locally, defend the QE2, but obviously we failed there. They demolished it. That was our local hospital. Stop the incinerator. We run there. Actually regenerate Hatfield Town Centre. That's more of a work in progress, but we've certainly won in the sense of getting people to come to the table and start looking at what they're actually going to do. That was outside the Labour Party. That was just before I joined the Labour Party. We had a residence scheme, residence group called Action Hatfield, which helped to really sort of put pressure on. I get involved in a number of things. You know, I'm certainly against fox hunting. I remember going to a meeting at the Cavendish pub, I think, in the mid '90s, against fox hunting, and I think that was one of the biggest mistakes they made last year. Was Theresa May sort of floated the idea of repealing the anti-hunting bill. I get involved in lots of things, but it's all a question of time, really.
And I just figured about it on that front. Sorry, just trying to think about. Do you have any sort of like the sort of thing your family treat about involving like minors and stuff like that? Do you have any of that sort of lineage in your family, or is it just you just generally campaigned for that just because you thought it was just wrong that what was happening?
Yeah, absolutely. My mum and dad were members of the Labour Party then. My mum stood for election actually in 1983 when she was carrying my brother. We recently found all the archives at the council, and one of the chief executive left, and we had a party, and we dug out all these archives, and my mum was there, and we all had a good chat about that. All the councillors come together at a social event, and a few times we actually have done that. The lineage is there that my mother particularly wanted to make a difference. She was in the campaign for nuclear disarmament. We had all the badges and everything on the wall at home. I've still got a number of things from the National Union of Miners that we were given. That lineage stays strong. I mean, none of my family are miners. We've always lived in Hatfield. We've got chalk mines here, of course, but no one's been mining those for some time. But I think it's always been a case of, certainly as a child growing up, is questioning everything, rebelling against things that you must, supporting against things that you want to see, and really not a problem with authority, but questioning authority. And that's really what dragged me into politics. I attended a few council meetings and I thought, is this really how it works? Is this the best that we have to offer? Are these the people making the decisions that materially affect my life? And I thought, I'm not going to have that. So I thought, what am I going to do? I'm going to get in there and change it. And we still are, hopefully, in the progress of doing that.
You talked about Iraq. This was the question I was going to ask. You talked about Iraq and you campaigned against it. And I understand there was
I
a huge...
went on a march.
Yeah, that's also like a huge slew of the Labour Party and such were, heavily against it as well. Like, why do you think there was such a disconnect, I think, between the top brass of Labour, like the Blairs as such, and as opposed to, like, the more grassroots types as well as some of the MPs, a lot of whom resigned? Why do you think there was such a disconnect at that time, and do you think that Corbyn now has, I guess, resolved the disconnect, do you think?
Yeah, I think history has shown us in times of armed war and conflict, particularly following coalitions against evil notionally, but usually, sadly, for financial interests of natural resources. I think the government, rather than the party, is often tied to following those bigger interests where they lead us, and I think that has almost always been the case of ignoring. We don't have referendums on these things before we go to war. I'm not suggesting we should, but in terms of tying it to public opinion, I think that it's very easy for them to just ignore that, play the card that we're being attacked, we've got to do something. 45 seconds, or I forget. We could have weapons coming here. They're trying to attack us, whipping people up. I don't think it works. Actually, I think the British people are wise to it. But because people go out and protest, I don't think it really makes a lot of difference, to be honest, when they decide those things. And you mentioned Jeremy Corbyn. I think that's one of the key things. I think people actually believe that it wouldn't be the case if he was in charge. And
he was against both of the wars, and I just why do you think, I guess, there's such a public disconnect now between, I guess, people, some of these warmongers of the cabinet and stuff like that? Because I remember, was it the polls before we struck Syria just recently? It was like only 25% supported strikes. Why do you think there's become such a public disconnect? Do you think Iraq was, I guess, the breaking point of that, or do you think that came before, like, people more sceptical about going to war, do you think?
I can only assume, but I think politicians have got used to people massively being against conflict, and I think they've got used to ignoring them.
Fair enough. And I guess to wrap this up now, just what was your favourite song? Just because it's a radio show, I can see if I can get it up.
Yeah, this is the hardest question that I knew would be coming. I like all music. I have such a wide range of weird musical tastes. I like punk, Britpop, hip hop, all the rock classics down the years. I liked the 90s rave scene, dance music, good dance music. I've got no time for the rubbish stuff. But so therefore I listen to different stuff all the time. But my favourite song, I would have to say, is LA Woman by The Doors.
Okay, sure, I'll just see if I can get that part of here. If not, I'll just go on YouTube because I'm not particularly bothered. I'll go on YouTube and get it off, never mind. Give me a second. Yeah, that's the final thing I was going to ask. And yeah, thank you for coming in today. I'll just leave the song as we finish up here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Yeah, the home of print, radio and TV for students.
Yeah, that was just my show, and thank you for listening, everybody. I'm just going to play the jingle before heading off.
Debates and discussions. Local elections.